Thank you for tuning in to the Ultimate Coach podcast, a companion to the transformative book, The Ultimate Coach, written by Amy Hardison and Alan D. Thompson. Each conversation is designed to be a powerful wake-up call, reminding us of what's possible for you and your life. So if you're on a journey to expand your state of being, this podcast is for you. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Ultimate Coach podcast. I'm Meredith Bell, your host for this episode, and I am delighted to welcome as my guest, Peter McCammon. Peter, welcome to the show.
Hi, Meredith. Thank you for having me.
Well, I want to give a little bit of history, Peter, about why I wanted to have you as a guest. We connected on Facebook because I had seen a post about this workshop that you had conducted in the Phoenix area about creating your document. And I was intrigued by the write-up of this experience from someone who had been there. And so I requested the recording and went through the full workshop, and it was so powerful. I was so moved by your story, your experience, that I knew that you had really valuable insights that could benefit the entire being community around the Ultimate Coach. So I'm so glad you said yes to the invitation, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Good to be here, and thank you for watching my workshop.
Well, I want to also let our listeners know that professionally, you're a transformational coach who works with business owners and leaders to help them escape stress, overwhelm, and self-doubt. And you have focused on guiding clients towards clarity, confidence, and success, not by striving harder, but by helping them embrace who they already are. And I think that leads really nicely into what I'd like us to talk about initially, were some of the big takeaways and insights for me from your workshop that I think our listeners would find really valuable. And one of the first things you talked about were the levels of listening to yourself. And that to me was profound because I don't think we all take enough time to listen to ourselves. And I would love for you to go deeper with that and explain what you meant by that and the different levels.
Sure. Well, I guess what I presented on the workshop was something that I learned from my own coach, Ankush Jain. And he, whenever I was creating my document, I went through the same process with him that I shared on the workshop. And he started that process by asking us a question, and he created what he called the listening distinction. And he said, effectively, he asked the question, if you could spend an hour in a room with anybody, and you knew that if you had that opportunity, you would be so tuned in to every word that they would say that you just wouldn't miss anything. We had to think of a person that could be somebody that was known to us, alive, dead, historical, didn't matter, as long as we knew that kind of listening would be there. And he then asked us a second question. And the second question was, if you had to spend a room in an hour with somebody and you would be so disinterested in what they had to say for whatever reason, that you wouldn't hear almost anything that they said, can you think of somebody who that would, who would fit that kind of criteria? And so we had to think about a person who would fit both those criteria. And then what he went on to say that really stuck with me was that the level of listening has nothing to do with the other person that you would be in the room with. The level of listening is always a choice. And so that really hit me, because I was thinking that, well, of course, the level of listening in some way is correlated with the other person who I would be in the room with. But he really took time to show us that the level of listening is always a choice. And then he moved into the process of helping us create our documents by having us really listen to ourselves for a period of time, to listen to the language at a sometimes verbal and sometimes at a level of thought that we have for ourselves, about ourselves. And he had us listen for the different ways that we talk about ourselves so critically or harshly or judgmentally, and to basically compile a list. He wanted us to get really clear on just how we treat ourselves with our language. But he really used that listening distinction to, I suppose, just create a picture of the level of listening that he wanted us to bring to ourselves in that process.
I'm curious what you learned about yourself in going through what you just described, thinking about the person you would listen to, you wouldn't listen to, and then listening to yourself. What insights did you personally gain from that?
I suppose I found the picking the two people was relatively straightforward. You know, both of the people that I chose were people that are known to me. I might have picked them for different reasons. I don't need to go into those reasons, but what I learned about myself when I brought that level of listening to how I think about me and how I speak to myself in my own mind, I compiled a list of different ways in which I judged myself over a relatively short space of time. I compiled pages and pages and pages of ways in which I could see that I thought about myself harshly. I've used the word brutal to describe it. It felt brutal. If I had, there's just no way I would ever speak to anybody else the way I found that I regularly thought about or spoke to myself. So that was interesting, because I knew there would be some judgments in there. I just didn't know how much or how strong or how, the strength of the judgment was what took me aback, actually. That was probably the biggest thing, the strength and the range of the judgments.
As I was listening to you so far, one of the things that hit me when we think about two different people like that, who would I listen to and who would I not? And the person that we would most listen to, with every word that they would speak meaning so much to us, the question that came to my mind was, why would we not be that way with everyone? If we really see them, every human being is valuable, why would we be selective in who we choose to give that kind of presence and attention to?
Wow, what a great insight.
And then thinking about the things you listed about yourself and really listening to ourselves, speak to ourselves that way, because I know for myself, I had a similar experience with listing so many judgments. And I'm guessing other people that have taken the time to really go deeply with this creation of the document and doing that part of the judgments, it's reason to pause and think about, when we judge ourselves in that way, we can bring that same judging spirit to our interactions with others. So to me, a side benefit or a key benefit of going through this process of learning how to replace those judgments with more loving statements about ourselves, did you find that also enabled you to have a more loving spirit towards others?
Undoubtedly, I would say that my experience since I've been using my document, since I've committed to being that in my life, the degree to which I judge myself has reduced a lot. What is also reduced is the amount of time that I spend in judgment. When I do judge myself, I find that I'm much more likely to catch that early and turn that around by coming back to the words of my document. And the correlation with what you've asked is that as I have found myself less judgmental and critical of me, I have found myself to be more curious, less judgmental, more open to others. It seems that follows, one has followed the other. I don't know that I have kind of put a conscious effort into having to make that shift. It just seems like that was something that naturally flowed from me changing my thinking about me and my language about me.
Yes. Yeah, I think you're right. It doesn't have to necessarily be a conscious effort. When it's focused on creating you, then naturally you're creating others in a different way too. One of the things you had said in that workshop that kind of stuck with me was this idea of learning to love yourself after spending decades loathing yourself. And yet I'm curious if you were consciously aware of this loathing of yourself, or if that was something that kind of emerged from the work that you did.
I think I may have been vaguely conscious of it. It just was something that came into much sharper focus as a result of the whole document process. And what I came to realize that I had spent decades leveraging the outcomes in my life by judging myself, by, taking a not good enough kind of, or could do better, or must do better, or chastising myself for failure, and that was the mechanism that I used. And I kind of probably was aware of it, but didn't see a problem with it. What was interesting was I didn't know there was an alternative. I wasn't aware of the possibility of what life could look like or feel like when I started to forgive myself, when I started to let go of judgment, when I started to think about myself in a different way, when I started to learn to love myself. Because forgiveness for me had always been something that I had to offer to somebody else. I had never, I'd missed that class, I'd missed that lesson, or I just had I had no filter within me that saw that as available. And that was fascinating, because when I discovered that, I remember when I was going through this process of forgiving myself for the judgments, the sense of freedom was, I could physically feel there was a shift happening inside of me as I went through that process of letting go of judgment. And it just, I don't know if it immediately turned into self-love, but the freedom that I felt by just letting go, by forgiving myself for the judgments, was that was an enormous moment in my life. I mean, I remember the first time I physically kind of felt, oh, that this is really significant. And it has continued to be hugely significant, because, I'm not immune to judging myself, and now I know how to get back to self-love. And so that shift from judgment to love, if you like, or from loathing to love, it has been, it has been and continues to be a journey, and also a daily process, where there are times when I just have to get back into that place of being willing to forgive myself, to let go.
And one of the things that I enjoyed and was very moving to me was the guidance you were giving participants in that workshop, and then the actual experience of having different ones speak up around repeating the phrase, I forgive myself for judging myself as, and then what's more true is, and allowing the time to just be with those statements to see what emerges. Because as you pointed out so well there, you're not looking for something that's the opposite of what the judgment was. It's allowing something even more powerful and more positive to emerge. And I think it would be great if you could speak to that and why that approach works so well.
I think I suppose the reason I work with people in that way is the creation of the document, and maybe not at the time, but it has come to mean to me, it's a spiritual experience. It's not just something that you construct. It's something, it is used, I think you used the word emerges. It's the language is something that, I mean, I've just seen this time and time again. It's language that emerges from within people that I think on some level, we know who we really are, but we've forgotten. There's so much of life is the messaging that comes at us is critical or negative or half empty, not glass half full, or certainly not any more than glass half full. And we get these ideas about ourselves that you just become kind of so ingrained. But I believe that deep within us, there is a space or a place where we do know, where we do remember. And I think that just the approach that I take with people is to allow them time and space, just to allow those words to emerge. And so it's not a just come up with the opposite of your judgments. There's something much, much deeper available, or something. I think when it comes from that place or that space, I guess the way I see this is that it's the best form of words that I have been able to come up with. The way I see this, the document that I have is the best form of words that I have been able to come up with that describes who I truly am. Now, if you have a document, your document, I really believe is the best form of words that you can come up with that describes who you really are. But because I'm not the same person, we have different documents. But I really see that this is, the creation of the document is deep transformational work. And I see it as spiritual. And so that's why I allow that time and space for my clients or people that are working with me to, just to really go deep with the experience.
Yeah, I was just thinking about your clients, because I think this is a part of your process of working with them, is helping them create their own documents. And I'd love for you to share, what are some examples of changes you've seen happen as a result of people going through this process? How are they different when they have gone through and created the document as a result of all the other steps that precede that?
I think this happens in two different ways. The process of creating the document, it opens a door to something. I think that the letting go and the creation of the new statements it unlocks a door to something new that's available to them. And so then that people have their document. So I had a conversation this morning with a client, and he's just finalizing his document. We've been working on it for a while, and it's really it's an incredible piece of work. I absolutely love his document. And we had a conversation this morning about what next. How do I embed this? How do I integrate this? How do I carry this forward now that I have, he's got a document on his laptop that has this list of declarations. And he said, Peter, well, actually, I said to him, look, if you really commit to this, if you commit to being this, and we talked about a number of different ways that he could integrate and commit to being his document. And he said, look, and I said, this will change your life. If you commit to this will change your life. It will change your relationships. It will change how you show up to your work, to your family. And he said, I know this already because I already feel the difference. Having just done what I've done, I already feel the difference. And he gave me a couple of examples of ways in which he was already starting to see that. And so, it's not unusual for me to hear people say things like that the process in and of itself begins to create some kind of change. But then when people really commit to it, and I'm thinking about one client in particular, and I mean, he started to work with me because he heard me talk about my document one day, and he was really interested in that. He was interested in just working on, his goals in life, but aligning that with mission and values. And he wanted to try and bring that all together. And he heard me talk about the document, and he thought, oh, that's interesting. And so we had a chat, and he ended up hiring me to work with him on his document. And he has jumped into that in such a powerful way. I just see him. He was such a powerful and energetic person and an impactful person in the world that he operates in to begin with. And I just see that he's taken that to a completely different level. I mean, within a month of finishing his document, he stood up in front of a group that he was invited to speak at, and he shared his document. I don't think many people are doing that. We talked about this, and I'd said to him, we talked in the session about what he might say at this group, and he concluded that the most powerful thing that I can tell them about me right now is my document. And so he did. And so when people commit to being their document, they change. Actually, I'm going to share a personal story about this, because my own story with this is I shared my document with my wife at the beginning of January 2023. And she came to me in July and she said, "You've changed. How do I get one of these?" So, I probably can't give you a more powerful story for me than that, because I've been married to Jules for over 30 years, and she's lived with me for over 30 years, and she's known me, better than anybody else during that time. And she reflected to me afterwards, "When you shared the document with me, I thought it was just another thing that you stumbled on." And she said, I realized quite quickly that you were very committed to it. And then I saw you begin to show up in ways that were different to me. And I saw your commitment, and I saw that this was really impacting how you were showing up to life and how you were seeing yourself. And so, I suppose the most powerful answer that I can give to your question is that's how that looked in my own life. And so I see different versions of that in my client's life, but change and transformation is inevitable, because what I learned from Ankush, you learned from Steve Hardison, is language creates. Our language, it's not descriptive. It creates. It really does create. And it took me a while to kind of see that. I mean, I see it on a certain level, and I know there's so much more for me to see about what that really means. But language is important, and it creates. And when we change our language about ourselves, we change. Simple as that.
Well, and also we're always evolving. I think about you sharing with me earlier, you had set, financial goals this year that initially you thought were pretty impossible, was a word I think that had occurred to you, or you hadn't considered a goal that ambitious, and yet here you are making it happen. And I think this is something that all of our listeners, and myself included, would value hearing about. What shifted for you it doesn't matter what the amount was, but just what shifted for you in playing with the idea of a new number that was bigger than something you had considered before, and then actually coming to believe it was possible, not impossible.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing about that is that I came up with the goal in a conversation with Ankush, and I don't know if I really believed it was possible. I wanted to set something that would stretch and challenge me, but there was something in me that said, like, go big here, go big. And it was like a goal that was 2.5 times more than I'd ever achieved in a 12-month period before. So it wasn't like incremental growth. And I think on a certain level, I mean, intellectually, I knew it was possible, but knowing it intellectually and knowing it here are two very different things. And so I think there were a number of things a couple of things that happened. One was committing to the goal. The second thing was sharing it. I shared it. I'm part of a coaching mastermind with 4 other incredible coaches. And yeah, we call ourselves the Magic Five. I shared it with them at the beginning of this year. I'd never shared a goal like that before, not in the way that I'd shared it. It was, it was something much more intentional about the way I shared it with them. And I mean, within 3 months, I mean, I'm now sitting at roughly 40% more than my entire year last year, so far in the last 4 months and 2 weeks. And add into that I took an entire month off to go and visit my children in Australia. So I've done that over 3 working months and 2 weeks. And it's difficult to pinpoint what I am doing differently. I don't feel like I am doing anything that different from what I've done before, but I know my way of being with my clients who are coming up to renewal, and my way of being with people who are curious about working with me has completely changed in what I see to be possible for them. And what has kind of happened for me in going after this goal, it's almost like it's an old phrase one of my old pastor used to say. He says, sometimes you have to behave before you believe. And it feels like one of those moments. But as things have happened, I mean, it's quite easy for me to believe that the goal is entirely possible at a heart level now. But what that has opened up for me, or what that has opened up inside of me, is this massive shift in believing what's possible for anybody that I'm in a conversation with. And I think my clients and potential clients are feeling that. I think they're just feeling I just zero doubt that they have everything that they need inside of them to accomplish whatever it is they want to accomplish. I think that has really changed. My belief in me and my belief in what's possible for me has changed. And as a result of that, my belief in what's possible for them has just, well, I'd say, exponentially grown.
I don't want to go ding, ding, ding. That is such an important point. We can't possibly help others see beyond where we've already been ourselves. We have to have made that journey to see the possibilities for ourselves in order to, because to me, what's happening with these potential clients is they aren't feeling that from you. You are freer, it seems like, to believe in them because you've seen what's possible for yourself. And so it's easier to extend that to them as well because you've experienced it firsthand.
Yeah, I think so, Meredith. Yeah, that's kind of how it looks to me. So, I think it just becomes clearer and clearer to me that as a coach, the work on me, it's just not an option. I've got to keep doing the work on me because that has to be, the biggest thing that I work on. If I work on me and I can kind of grow and change, and what that opens up for my clients is enormous.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned you'd recently spent a month in Australia. You were with your 2 adult children, and I read your newsletter about that experience, multiple articles, and you had so many different insights. I'd love for you to extract a few of those to share with our audience that are things you learned from your kids or just experiences you had that opened your mind even more to different possibilities.
Yeah, so interesting because they have. I remember when my kids were growing up, I would hear people say, "Oh, my kids are my biggest teachers," and I kind of I didn't always get what they meant, and I get it now in terms of how I experience my kids. When I was the age, my kids are 28 and 30 right now, and whenever I was their age, I had a good job. I was happily married. They were both born, but I was playing it really safe. I did not, I guess I was very risk averse. I mean, they have just, I've watched them over the last 10 years grow up, leave home, become independent, qualify in what they wanted to qualify in, decide to move to the far side of the world, and my daughter has done this a couple of times. She's been to Canada, she's in Australia, and she's probably not finished. And she just, that would have petrified me at her age. I mean, I just don't think it would have been an option for me in terms of the person I was being at that point in time. And so just watching them allow what they really, really want to do to take shape and then just go and take action on it. I mean, for me, it's their dad. I mean, it just fills me with joy on one hand to see them do it, but it fills me with inspiration on the other hand, because I see that it's almost like there's nothing we can't do here. They just go for it. So I'm inspired by that. So that was a big insight, and so I get to watch that at a distance when I'm living in Northern Ireland and they're in Australia, but to be up close and present with them and just to listen to them as they talk about their hopes and their plans and their dreams and what they want to do next, and how that just looks so completely different from how life looked to me when I was their age, and I'm so excited for them, for the future, and what that, I guess, has evoked in me is, I mean, I'm going to be 57 in 3 days. I've never been more excited about the future. Never. So that's just such a, to be in that place right now, I'm so grateful for that. I'm so grateful for that. And, sky is the limit. It's kind of how it feels.
When you think of your own growth over these last 2.5 years since you created your document, and how you are with your kids now compared to how you were before, are there some differences in who you're being when you're with them than how you were before in terms of responding to things they tell you or experiences they're pursuing?
I'm much less fearful. Whenever, they came and said, hey, I'm going to Canada or I'm going to Australia, or I'm probably, my natural first thoughts would have been to think about all the possible things that could have gone wrong. What could possibly go wrong? And I could have a long list really quickly. And I'm much less fearful and much more excited now when they come to me and share what they're thinking about. My daughter's looking at some further training right now, and we had a lovely conversation this morning about what she's thinking about and how she can possibly make it happen, and I'm excited for her. Excitement is much more prevalent than fear now. Fear is much less present for me in general, but certainly around them. And I guess part of that is because, I guess as a father, I feel, even though they're adults, I'm still their father, so there's a feeling of responsibility or whatever, but they're showing me the way at so many levels. And I'm like, yeah, go for it. And so I'm excited about that, because it's almost like Steve Hardison, if I'm quoting him correctly, has used a phrase, and he says something along the lines of, everybody's my coach. And my kids are my coach right now. And we talked a few minutes ago about, if I grow, that creates possibility for my clients to grow. Well, as my kids are growing, that's creating possibility for me to grow, because of what I'm seeing in them and because of what I'm learning from them. So, yeah, just that.
Yeah, it just speaks to appreciating for who they are. I think as parents, a lot of our fears come from that loss of control, loss of feeling like that needing to be responsible to guide them in the right way, as though we know the right way for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it sounds like you've discovered the beauty of kind of releasing that need to
Yeah.
have the answers or be responsible for their decisions and just enjoy them for where they are in a given moment.
Yeah, that I think I'm definitely I've made progress in that area, and it took me time, and I think they would probably say, yeah, it took time, but I've definitely let go of a lot of fear that was coming from loss of control, I guess. Yeah.
Well, and to me, you know what, Peter, this ties in with this whole area we've been talking about related to possibilities and what we might see as impossible. If we're working within a set container, if you will, a set of beliefs or a set of limited thoughts about what's possible for us, what's possible for our kids, then we bring that lens to what we see and then how we interpret it and what meaning we assign to it. And to me, that is the beauty of living into your document, because you're not limited by those kinds of containers.
I think that's really true for me at this stage. I shared with somebody yesterday whenever I was probably about 35, 36. I know that looking back at that stage, I thought I had life figured out. I really, at that point in my life, and within 2 years, I had completely burnt out. And everything that I thought to be true, it just fell apart. And it was one of the most important things that has happened in my life. And I was living life back then. So we're talking almost 20 years ago through a lens, or, I was seeing life through a container that I thought was everything that needed to be known, or, maybe even, well, not that could be known, but everything that needed to be known. What I knew was just such tiny fraction, doesn't even cover it, but tiny fraction of what is available to be known, or what is, and out of that comes possibility, because there's a possibility that anything can happen. There's a possibility that anything can happen, and I was seeing life through this lens that was just, it had put so many lids and chains on top of that. I had my little list of beliefs about the way I thought things worked. That was how I saw, that was the lens, or those were the composite lens through which I saw everything. And it was, negligible in terms of what was available to me, for me to see. And so I think, since then, there's been a process of me opening up to seeing more and more. And the last 2 years since I've had my document, that has accelerated quite dramatically, really dramatically.
Thinking about you and learning from your kids, I'm a grandmother now, and learning from my grandchildren, as well as my daughter and her husband. I think as long as we keep our eyes open, our hearts open, and our minds open to seeing what others can teach us, we can have our lives enriched dramatically. It's just that too often we have the wrong glasses on, let's say, and so we can't see what's right in front of us. So the evolution that you're describing within, your own growth and with your own family, it seems to me allows you to have a closeness with your kids that maybe wasn't even possible before because of your thinking about those relationships.
I think so. I mean, wrong glasses, wrong listening. There was too much of a rush to be with somebody. Those things were all going on for me. And, I know for me inside, the pace at which my internal system operates at now is so much slower than it used to be. It's just, slower is the right word, calmer, maybe calmer. But I'm not, my head is not going at the pace that it used to. It feels like more things are happening. So it feels like a contradiction in terms, or a paradox, or whatever the right phrase is. But it really feels as if I have become more present. Yeah, I think more present with my listening, more present with my seeing.
I think there's a slowing down of the mind, and a calmer mind allows us to have greater clarity. And so that clarity allows us to get more done in a calmer, relaxed manner than when our brain is sped up with too many things and it's too busy trying to sort through.
That makes sense. I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, we can focus more and get more done in a more time efficient way. Peter, is there anything else that we haven't covered that's kind of occurring to you like, oh, I'd like to share this before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I mean, it's been a different conversation to what I thought it was going to be, in the sense of I just love that we've talked about how kids are, Jake and Soph, by the way, in case you ever listen to this, I haven't forgotten your names. How we've touched on this idea that, they're my teachers, they're my coaches. Yeah, I've so loved reconnecting with that idea. I think it's, that part of our conversation has been really powerful for me. So I think that's the piece that I'm taking away from this. The other piece that I'm taking away is just almost like an insight that, for me, the journey of change and transformation that I can track back to almost 20 years, well, since 2006, really. So 19 years. And it feels like I've been plugging away at how do I grow, how do I change, how do I see things differently. And it just feels, as time has passed, it's like that idea that over the last couple of years since I've had my document, that's accelerated. That's very exciting for me right now. And if that's available to me, that's available to anybody, because I was stuck.
And having the document gives you that clarity that I think allows for that acceleration. And the other word that has been coming to mind as I'm reflecting on our conversation is the word humility. This idea of we stay humble to recognize we don't have the answers, that we're in a consistent state of learning, and every person can be our teacher, even our own kids, and grandkids. And this idea of bringing that learner mindset in our interactions with others, it's like your clients sense your confidence and your sense of what's possible having expanded. They sense that. I'm guessing your kids and other people who experience you sense also your openness to learning, your humility in not trying to convey, I've got the answers, but instead you're open to learning from them. I think all of that combines to make a powerful presence when you're with somebody else.
Yeah, I think some people would definitely agree with you. Yeah, but what you said makes sense. It absolutely makes sense. My experience of how I hear other people engage with me around what they're seeing, this certainly would confirm what you've just said for me in my world.
Well, I sensed it from you in the way you conducted the workshop, not as someone who has all the answers, but speaking possibility into others and sharing what you've learned. And I feel like you've done that in our conversation today. And I know with what you're doing in your work with your clients, that's, who you're bringing to those relationships, and the benefits are profound and powerful. So I want to thank you for the work you're doing and for being with me today, and just who you're being in the world, Peter. Very generous, loving, and humble, and just an amazing learner. And I just am so grateful you've been with us today.
Thank you so much, Meredith. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for the invitation. And it's just been such a pleasure to be with you and spend this time with you. And thank you for the amazing work that you're doing with this podcast as well. it's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Look forward to staying in touch too.
Absolutely. Yeah, I will look forward to that.
Thank you for joining us today. If there's someone you know who could benefit from this conversation, please share this episode with them. Also, check out our website, beingmovement.com. You'll find valuable resources and links to connect to an engaging and wonderfully supportive community. Together, we can inspire and support each other on the path to a greater understanding of being. Until next time, take care and be kind to yourself.